Well, hello everybody, wherever you may be. This is Frank Leone, and it's my pleasure to be the primary speaker for episode number 7. And episode number 7 will reflect chapter 25 of my book, and that chapter is entitled Never Express Anger in Writing.
And I'm Mitch Goddard, and I am Frank's partner in the 77 group. And this week on our YouTube channel, we'll be covering, as Frank said, Chapter 25, Never Express Anger in Writing, which comes from his newly released book, 77 Ways to Perfect Your Communication Skills, Enhancing Your Personal and Professional Relationships. That's available right now, so hop on over to www.77grp.com and pick up your copy today. Available in paperback and hardcover, and soon the ebook will be available, so look for that as well. My book, 77 Principles, Tips, and Takeaways for Exceptional Leadership, will be due out later this year. And part of our back and forth on our YouTube channel is we take something, a chapter from Frank's book, and then the following week a chapter from my book. We explore a little deeper into each chapter, and then provide the full spectrum of our expertise on that topic right here on YouTube. It couples very well with the books, so if you have both working for you, you get everything we can offer you on the subject matter. Also, each week we pick of those of you that choose to send us a question on our topic each week. We will pick the best question of the week, and the winner gets 15 minutes on the phone with either Frank or I to explore further on the topic matter, or to just get to know each other at your discretion. So make sure you send us a question. You might be a big winner. And also, of course, we ask that you subscribe. And if you haven't already, please do that. It's free. And if you like what you see, please let us know. Hit like, send us a comment. We're always happy to hear from you. And with that, I'll send it right back to Frank, who will get us launched into chapter 25 from his book, Never Express Anger in Writing. Frank?
Well, thank you, Mr. Mitch, and I'm glad you mentioned the book, because guess what? Guess what I'm happy to show you? It came in.
Look at that, folks.
It's here. There it is.
Yeah.
And the side of it, and the back, and this is the soft cover. The hardcover takes another week or two, so I'll be getting the hardcover shortly as well. But they're starting to be delivered now, and it's just very exciting to see it. Something tangible that you can hold on to. So it is available. So in any event, the topic is never express anger in writing. And I felt that it was very appropriate to include a chapter of the book on that topic. For starters, it's something that I erred in the past. And there's nothing like making an error to learn a lesson the hard way, and then really going on and telling others to be very careful about committing the same error. And it's extraordinarily important. It's extraordinarily important because really things last forever when they're in writing. And that's tip number 1. The written word is forever. And to really understand that there are things that were written in the 13th, 14th century that is still out there that people can read. So you can only imagine what any of us might say at this point in time, with the sophistication of communications that are out there. How long whatever we say in writing, whether it's a book or whether it's an email or whether it's a text message or a letter or whatever it may be, how long that may sustain. It may sustain many, many decades or even centuries. So when you understand that context, and you understand that modern technologies make it so much easier to forward things nowadays, so that if you express something either in a good way or in a bad way, that can multiply or even exponentiate over time. It's not like 30 or 40 years ago where if you wrote a letter and you said something angry in that letter, maybe somebody would make a copy of it and show it to somebody. Now you can say something and it can go viral and go to 20, 30, 40 people who in turn send it to another 10 people apiece. And on it goes. You never know where it might end. So it's very important to really understand that that written word is forever, and that written word has a propensity to get in many more hands than you would like it to be. So it's a very, very important point, and it's something that is eminently avoidable, but it's an easy trap to fall into. So that's my first tip.
So Frank, you're so right. You put one email out or one text message out that you kind of like to walk back, and who knows where that's going to end up. Is there something that somebody could do to mitigate how far a message goes out once it's already been launched?
Well, I guess my first gut initial reaction is make sure there's nothing in the message that you wouldn't want somebody else to see. I mean, that's step one.
Right. Okay.
That
That's the whole point here.
everything you write that can be forwarded to somebody else, and again, email seems to be the common mode of communication as we sit here in the year 2020. Every time you write something now, you have got to make the assumption that it can be seen by many other eyes other than the party that it's being sent to. And if you construct things with that in mind, and always ask yourself, is this something that I would not mind being seen by many people, many of which I have no idea who they may be, then you're circumventing that as much as you possibly can. So I think that is really key.
And great advice. Someone smarter than me told me years ago, anything you write down or you put in writing, make sure it's ready for publishing. Okay. And but let's say something does kind of make its way out. Is there a diplomatic way to walk it back?
If there's something that you send out, and these things really depend, one thing when responding to almost any question is that you really basically begin your response with the phrase, it depends. There's different situations, there's different degree of anger, there's different degree of need to walk back, there's different degree of threat of where it could go, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the first caveat, is to really measure what you're saying against the intensity and the likelihood of it being sent forward in the first place. Because you can have, one of the something that I've always really adhered to is, and I mentioned it elsewhere in the book, is try not to call attention to a negative. So sometimes the mere act of walking something back is calling attention to something that the other party didn't realize in the first place.
Right.
It's almost like, please don't send this terrible message to anybody else because I really didn't mean it. And it puts it right in the other person's mind, hey, I should send it to somebody else. Show everybody else what an idiot this guy is to say such terrible things in an email. So you want to be careful about that. That said, yes, you can walk things back. There's no problem in that. And, as we've discussed in previous week, sincerity is the best policy. And if you make a mistake like that and feel that in that particular circumstance it's warranted, I would certainly send another follow-up email and just say, oops, I just noticed that this may be misconstrued when I said such and such. I really didn't mean it that way, and I just don't want to take any chance that you would find it offensive. So again, it's a continuum, just like everything else in life, from it being something that has to be dealt with right away to something that probably best not to call attention to it. You have to use some subjectivity there.
Sure. Understood. Great points. What else do you got? What's next?
Well, tip number 2 is always sleep on a concern. That's something that I really, really have learned. And, that's one of the reasons that Mitch and I do this, is that we both had long enough careers, mine longer, I'm the older of the partners here. We've had long enough careers where we've had a chance to make mistakes and learn the hard way and adapt to the right way. And it's a real opportunity for us to share with people the right way before they fall into the wrong way too often or too early in their careers. And one of the things I really learned is sleeping on a concern, that when I'm upset, and it doesn't necessarily have to be in writing, it can be verbally as well, hold my horses until the next day. And I'll tell you what, it is amazing what the light of day the next morning, the rationality that tends to bring to you when you were upset the previous day. So I can't stress that enough. There's very few things that can't wait until the next morning in order to be addressed. And it gives you the possibility of a whole new perspective. And even if you don't need a whole new perspective, it gives you time to think it out and frame how you want to deal with it in a way that's more appropriate.
Yeah, and you make really the great point in your book to say, it's best to sleep on a concern and awaken as a reasoned diplomat rather than a fighter. And I, that's just great advice. A cool head is always going to prevail. But, sometimes your response is needed right away. Any recommendations in that kind of a scenario?
Well, again, it depends what right away really means. Sometimes right away is not really right away. Sometimes it has to be. You have to have a response by 5 o'clock, and that's the way it is. So if you are in a legitimate, and I emphasize the phrase legitimate, if you're in a legitimate situation where you have to respond, you really can't sleep on something and you're upset, you just have to really discipline yourself to watch your words and to really, again, be a diplomat, not a fighter, just like Mitch paraphrased from my book. So it's really, sure, you don't have to sleep on things if you can't, but if you can't, then try to leave that anger at the door. Anger really doesn't look good to anybody. It's just not it's not a positive trait and doesn't help anybody.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to make too many friends or allies if you're known for being angry much of the time.
Right.
Good point. So tip number 3, Frank, what you got?
Tip number 3 is ill-chosen words are as bad as confrontation. And by this I mean that never expressing anger in writing does not mean saying I am angry about this all the time. It may just mean the way you phrase things either suggests or is a blatant example of your being upset or concerned. So it's not just simply saying nasty or mean or negative things. It's also choosing words that that portray a sense of dissatisfaction and concern and potential anger in the eyes of the recipient of that written piece of information.
So, and in your book, you list a few ill-chosen words. Can you give us some examples?
Oh my gosh, it goes on, but upsetting is a good word for it. I don't like the word problem. Over and over again, back when I taught sales training for decades, I talked about never use the word problem when you're dealing with a prospect. Use the word opportunity. It's changing a negative to a positive. So upsetting or problem, or even the word concern. I'm concerned. Well, as soon as somebody's looking at me or writing to me and say, I'm concerned, it sets me back. It puts me on my heels. It makes me a little more defensive.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want to hear concern. I want to hear words that are switched into a positive vein. And again, I love opportunity or maybe clarification, things of that sort, mutually beneficial, things of that sort, I think are good substitutes for the kinds of phrases that I just offered as potentially suggesting concern or anger.
Sure. Now, part of communication is being the receiver of communication. Any recommendations or insight if you are the one receiving those ill-chosen words?
Yeah, it's really the same thing all over again, but I think it's really important to understand that you don't necessarily have to be the initiator of the mistake. You can also be the recipient of somebody being in error in that regard as well. So then it begs another question. Excellent question, Mitch. It begs another question, what do you do when the other person is being irrational? And you know what? The default mechanism over and over again, and been there, done that, trust me, is when somebody snaps at you, guess what you usually do? You snap back.
Right.
And what good does that do? It creates an endless cycle. So not easy to do. A lot of these things I've really mastered, sleeping on things and never expressing anger in writing, sort of gotten there with that. Something that's a lot harder, I have found, speaking personally, is when somebody confronts me not backing down. There's a certain, manhood kind of thing there that, you don't want to appear weak. You want to, stick up for yourself. And, that's actually not the rational thing to do. So could you repeat the question again?
Oh, well, just when you're on the receiving end, what do you do when someone is attacking you? And I think you pretty much covered that pretty well. To let the cycle of anger and bitterness or anything like that continue, then you're both. It's a lose-lose for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and there's sort of a classic definition out there of how you respond to anger in any situation. We used to talk about it a lot when we were training healthcare professionals. What if you have the angry patient? What do you do? And one of the first things that you do is you just take a deep breath and count to 5. Just don't respond immediately. Another thing that you do is try to find a separate area to talk to the person so it's not in public, which is an important thing to do as well. The next thing you do is you always show empathy and really try to understand their point. Ask them to clarify their point. It's very, very easy to misunderstand and think that the other party is expressing anger to you, but they don't really have anger. But I think if you do all those things, it tends to simmer down the anger, whether it's face-to-face or whether you're dealing with them in some sort of written communication.
Sure. Yeah, I know for me, I like to do what I can to diffuse anything like that versus adding to any kind of escalation. And as you mentioned, seek a little more understanding, to say something like, well, help me understand where you're coming from here, because I want to be fair and make this work for both of us. And then usually that'll calm things down. So good points all, Frank. Let's go on to tip number 4, sir. What you got?
That's a good segue, because tip number 4 is diplomatically respond to irritants. So what I basically mean here, and it's really sort of just taking the next step from what we just talked about in your last question, Mitch, that you posed to me, is what do you do when somebody does say something that's irritating to you? And again, we're really talking about in writing now. And I think the first thing is to show respect to the other party. And I really like phrases like, I understand why you might be concerned, or I understand why you might be upset. And I would like to do whatever I can to help talk through this and understand in more depth what your thoughts are, and see if we can come to some sort of resolution that you'd be comfortable with. So, again, a sort of classic negotiation style when somebody is upset, but it really falls back to much the same things again, just simply don't respond in kind.
Right. So exactly right. Then you just, you're going around and around and getting nowhere. Now, there's a delicate line, I think, between diplomacy and being maybe patronizing or insincere. Can you help someone draw the line between the two and avoid appearing patronizing or insincere?
I think a lot of it comes with practice. That I'm not even sure if it was at some YouTube presentation I did recently. I'm not sure if it was part of this series or not. I talked about the advisability of um, um, what's did you repeat the question again? I'm sorry, I just lost the question, Mitch, for a second.
The fine line between diplomacy and
Right.
sincerity or patronizing.
Right. And what I was talking about, it was the need to give people sincere praise. It may have been one of the earlier episodes of here, and that I had read the Dale Carnegie book back in 1963, and that I strove to do that. And for about 6 months, it was sort of artificial. And
Right.
then after a while, you know what? It became part of my DNA, and it's been that way for half a century. And I think the same thing applies to this as well. That initially, when you are addressing irritants that may come up, it may be almost forced. You're groaning through it as you're doing it. But the fact of the matter is that after a while, you recognize that, hey, this is the way to do it. As I was groaning through it the last 5 times that I did it, it actually worked.
Right.
So you know what? It's the thing to do. So I think practice makes perfect in this regard.
Sure. Yes, sir. So now let's move on to tip number 5.
Tip number 5 is never express anger before a group. And just as a point of comparison, over the I recently got a new email address. Long story, but the email address I've had for 20 or 25 years, I think ever since the creation of email, suddenly disappeared, and I had to get a new email address. So I sent out a blast to over 2,000 people in my email address book, advising them of the new email address. And I might add, as a very humorous aside, I didn't know it. I know it now, but I didn't know it. But Google does not look kindly on people that send out 2,000 emails in a day. In fact, it's a violation of service. So the irony is that Google disabled my service because I sent too many people messages about switching to a Google email. So, but the reason I bring up the story and the incident is that it's unnerving to send out an email to 2,000 people, because you make one mistake and it's 2,000 mistakes.
Right.
You say something stupid and it's 2,000 something stupids, and so forth and so on. I have a hard enough time with just one person trying to look stupid in front of, or trying not to look stupid in front of, but 2,000, my God. Well, I think the same thing is really true in front of a group for 2 reasons. One is that obviously it multiplies the damage. If you do something once, then it's in front of a lot of other people. The second thing is you have a lower threshold, because if you're speaking to a group of 100 people, that means that even if 10 people find it offensive, there's 10 people that found it offensive. If you're dealing with one person, they don't find it offensive, then it's not an issue. Right. So in both cases, it can be very, very devastating to you if you say something that appears to be in anger in front of a group. And I want to sort of separate it into two different types of anger. One is if you're really angry, you're angry at the group. In the book, one of my favorite anecdotes is, it's a whole other chapter that we'll get to, but it's this wonderful speaker that we had once that spoke on a conference that we held in Nashville. And he gave a pretty dull presentation, one of these bright guys that had an awful lot up here, but not a whole lot of pizzazz to him. He got about halfway through his presentation. The audience was not responsive. And he said to the audience, you look like a bunch of wooden soldiers. I remember I was sitting in the very back of the room, and I said, bad idea to tell the audience to insult your entire audience. Right. I mean, maybe some of these people up to this point liked you. Now you've lost them as well. You're really in trouble. So I think there's really that same analogy there as well, is that you can say something that's sort of insulting or angry to your audience. The other thing is that you can sort of feign anger in some way to express your concern about an issue. You're talking about, name what it is. I mean, name an issue, immigration. I mean, who knows what it is that
Okay.
may be out there in the public domain, and you think it's it's good presentation style to be pounding the podium and yelling and so forth. But if that's not your natural reaction, it does look forced. It does look feigned. And it's not necessary. And well-chosen words can get your opinion across just as effectively as sort of feigning some sort of enormous anger about an issue or about whatever you're talking about. So two subcategories here in showing anger before a group. One is anger toward the group, and the other is anger about something that you're exaggerating to get your point across.
Sure. And it's so true in any exchange, could be with a group or could be with an individual. People sense dynamics, and if you're trying to fake it, they're gonna spot that right off the bat. So, excellent points, Frank. So that is tip number 5. Any closing remarks before we move on, Frank?
Well, I'd like to just repeat the 5 tips briefly, and
Okay.
and hopefully they'll scroll across the screen.
Okay.
So all in one place. But tip number 1 is the written word lasts forever. Tip number 2 is always sleep on a concern. Tip number 3 is ill-chosen words are as bad as confrontations. Tip number 4 is diplomatically respond to irritants. And tip number 5 is never express anger before a group. So I wanted to cover those things. 2 other things that I wanted to cover. One is that my next presentation, which is 2 episodes down the road, Mitch will speak next week, is episode number 9. And that topic is going to be one that I really like. It's going to be short questions beget short responses. And very important topic, because one thing that I've learned over the years is so few people know how to answer questions succinctly and well. And it usually serves to their detriment when they are unable to do it well. And then finally, the last thing I want to say is that we do have this little contest every week where we pick out the best question that we received. And the question that I got that I liked the most was from Dan McCudis. And Dan mentioned he's from Chicago, and good for you, Dan. I love Chicago, and do me a favor and go by my favorite restaurant, Carmine's, right in Chicago, and get a nice big plate of calamari and tell them that Frank Leone sent you, and enjoy. But that said, Dan's question was, what is the best way to get communication started with a prospect? What is the best way to get a communication started with a prospect, thinking in a sales situation? Now, this is, right down my alley. I spent a good part of my career dealing with things like this. My previous book was about just these things. And the best thing is to find out about them, size them up. And there's the old acronym WIFM. What's in it for me? WIIFM. And anytime you're in a sales situation, you're looking for that win-win situation. And the best way to start to get to that win-win situation is finding out what triggers them, what appeals to them, what their needs are, what their deficits are, what's important to them. So the best way to begin a communication with a prospect is to just ask them a bunch of really good questions right at the outset. What keeps you up at night? What is your biggest concern with regard to this issue? In a perfect world, what would you like to see happen? What would be the best solution to this issue? Things of that sort. Anytime you're dealing with a prospect, and boy, salespeople, even some of the most savvy ones, make this mistake. They go in with both guns blasting, trying to sell their product, when you want to do just the opposite. You want to go in and right from the start, make that other party understand that from your perspective, it's all about them. You care about them. You're there to serve them, and you need to find out what triggers them. So Dan, that's how I would always start. Ask good questions. Always ask open-ended questions. I think that's really important. Point this out in in the book as well, never ask, a yes or no question. Are you satisfied with your current air conditioning system or current solar heating system? Ask them, what is the biggest concern that you have about your air conditioning system or solar heating system or whatever it may be. In other words, ask questions in an open-ended manner and in a way that is structured to elicit a concern that you and only you can solve for them. So Dan, thank you for your question, and email me. My email address, it should be up on the screen right now, frank at 77grp, 77group.com. Shoot me an email and let me know if you're interested in chatting for 15 minutes or so about anything you want, and we'll arrange a time and a day. So that's it. So Mitch, thank you for your help here.
Hey, great job again today, Frank. And Dan, again, thank you for your question. We urge all of our viewers and subscribers to engage us. Fill your comment in below our video. Let us know you like what you see, or let us know what you may not like and what you see. Either way, engage us. We love your questions, and we like getting back and forth with you. Okay, so remember, next week, chapter 45 of Frank's book, 77 Ways to Perfect Your Communication Skills and Enhance Your Personal and Professional Relationships. Short questions beget short responses. Make sure you tune in for that. Actually, that'll be in 2 weeks, the next time Frank rotates up. Also, remember to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Send us your comments and like our content if you would. And again, send us those questions. And now we like to do at the end of every episode is close with some personal thoughts. And I'll send it back to Frank to lead off.
Okay, thanks, Mitch, as always. And this is something we always like to do at the end. We think it's just to share what we think, and hopefully somebody will get value out of this, and it'll personalize ourselves a little bit more to you as well. But what I want to share this week is during this shelter in place, and here I am in my home office and Mitch in his home office. We're 4 hours apart from one another via automobile. But it's thank God for Zoom, and it's working for us. One of the things that I've been doing during the shelter in place months, it's more than 2 months now, is our dog. We have a lab who I love dearly. Mitch loves Brava too.
I sure do.
He does. And one of the Brava loves the pandemic because she gets to go on like these 80-minute walks every morning. And part of the 80-minute walk, and I basically do the exact same route. It's a very nice route. And part of that route is sort of in this indoor garage that I sort of go through. And a week or two ago, I saw this big board in there with some things written on it. And I don't know what it's from. It's sort of in a corner of the garage. But it was basically asking people a question. And I don't know if people were in a school or in a church or whatever the case may be, but asking some cluster of people a question, what do you want to do most before you die? And then it listed a number of people's responses. And so as I would walk through with the dog Brava, I would always sort of look at it and pick one or two and see what it is, and all sorts of things. One was I want to go hiking in Patagonia, and one is I want to live in Spain, and one is I want to make amends with my family. But there's one that I saw that I really liked, and it really reflects my philosophy as well, what I would like to do before I die. I retired 3 years ago, and that thought sort of went through my mind, how do I want to spend these retirement years? Of course, the answer is unretire and hang out with Mitch. So I'm not retired anymore technically, but having said all that, there's a lot of things I wanted to do. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to stay in touch with old friends. I wanted to spend more time with my family. There's a pretty lengthy list. But the thing that really jumped out to me the most was the same thing that somebody said on this board. And the answer was, what do you want to do most before you die? And the answer was, laugh a lot. And boy, is that not ever the truth. what's most important to me is that I just enjoy whatever time I have left, whether it's a month, whether it's 25 years. And to me, enjoyment is just laughing. It's laughing with friends. Uh, you know, one of the most important things to me in my life is the large number of close friends that I have. And I get no greater joy than speaking to them on the phone or doing email interactions or in other areas, seeing them and spending 90% of our time just laughing hysterically about this, that, and the next thing, whether it's classic stories from 50 years ago or whatever the case may be. But that's what brings joy to my life. And there's somebody else out there that feels that way as well, whoever that person may be. And I just wanted to share that, to don't underestimate the enormous value of laughter, and just really enjoy the things in life that bring smiles to your face and make you laugh. So that's my thought. Mitch?
Amen, Brother Frank. Yeah, the things that make you laugh just make you healthier, right? So oxygenates the body and is never a bad thing. So from one real great extreme that you just shared with us to maybe not an extreme in the other direction, but certainly a different thought that I wanted to share with everyone today. And I wanted to kind of stay in theme with the great tips that you gave today from your book, Never Express Anger in Writing. So I thought that I would share that anger can never coexist with reason, logic, diplomacy, happiness, or sincere laughter. And I think when we let ourselves get bogged down in resentment or bitterness, and we express our anger, we not only affect the outward relationships in our lives, but ultimately we start tearing down our own energy and our own ability to live a happy life filled with laughter. So with that, I will ask our friends to make sure that you join us again next week, where I will be talking about keeping your promises on our leadership chapter. Make sure you join us. And for Frank Leone, I'm Mitch Goddard. We thank you all for joining us. We are the 77 Group, and we'll see you next time.
And thank you all, and stay well and stay safe. Okay.